A teenager hands out chocolate and cigarettes to the men holding the line on the Italian front. He's not a soldier, but a volunteer. Then, an Austrian mortar shell drops into the position. Steel tears through the dark. The soldier in front of him is killed. His own legs are riddled with shrapnel. His 19th birthday is still 2 weeks away. Welcome to Same Day, Different Century. I'm Zach. Today is July 21st. That teenager was Ernest Hemingway, and the trench sat near a village called Fossalta di Piave. To understand how an 18-year-old from suburban Chicago ended up bleeding on the Italian front, it helps to start where he started. He was born on July 21st, 1899, in Oak Park, Illinois, a prosperous church-going suburb just west of Chicago. His father Clarence was a physician who took his children into the northern Michigan woods every summer, teaching them to fish, to shoot, and to name everything they saw. His mother Grace was a trained singer who filled the house with music and wanted her children cultured. Ernest was the second of 6. Those summers at Walloon Lake gave him his earliest subject: water, weather, animals, and the plain business of doing things well. The America of his childhood was still Victorian in its manners and its books. Popular prose ran ornate and moralizing, thick with adjectives and uplift. Hemingway would spend his career stripping that style to the bone, but first he had to learn a trade. He skipped college. In the autumn of 1917, at age 18, he took a job as a cub reporter at the Kansas City Star. The paper handed new reporters a style sheet: use short sentences, short first paragraphs, and vigorous English. Be positive, not negative. Hemingway later called them the best rules he ever learned for writing. 6 months of police blotters and hospital runs taught him to compress. Then the war pulled him in. He tried to enlist and was turned down for weak eyesight in his left eye, so he volunteered instead, driving ambulances for the American Red Cross in Italy. On the night of July 8, 1918, he was distributing supplies at a forward post when the mortar shell found him. Shrapnel filled his legs. He received Italy's Silver Medal of Military Valor and was one of the first Americans serving in Italy to be seriously wounded. He recovered in a hospital in Milan, where he fell for an American nurse named Agnes von Kurowski, several years his senior. She later ended the relationship by letter. The wound and the woman would both resurface, transformed in his fiction. He had come face to face with sudden death and sudden loss before he was old enough to drink. It set the themes he would return to for the rest of his life. But a wound and a set of newspaper rules do not, by themselves, make a revolution in prose. That happened in Paris. In 1921, Hemingway married Hadley Richardson and sailed for Paris as a correspondent for the Toronto Star. The city was cheap, and it was crowded with the writers and painters who would define modern art. Carrying a letter of introduction from Sherwood Anderson, he found his way into the circle around Gertrude Stein and the poet Ezra Pound. Stein and Pound became important early mentors. Stein sharpened his sense of rhythm and repetition, while Pound relentlessly edited his drafts and encouraged greater economy. Their influence mattered, but Hemingway was also refining lessons he had learned as a newspaper reporter and from the writers he admired. The method later got a name: the iceberg. In his book on bullfighting, Death in the Afternoon, Hemingway laid it out plainly. A writer who truly knows his subject can leave most of it out, and the reader will feel the missing part as surely as an iceberg's mass beneath the surface. Only 1/8 shows, the rest holds the weight. His sentences grew short and declarative. The feeling lived in what went unsaid, which forced the reader to supply it, and made the reader complicit in the emotion. This is where the popular image of Hemingway, the brawler, the hunter, the deep-sea fisherman, hides the truth of the work. The prose that looks effortless was the product of relentless revision. Asked years later why he had rewritten the last page of A Farewell to Arms 39 times, he said the trouble was getting the words right. The economy was earned, one deletion at a time. Stein gave him something else, a label. She told him his was a lost generation, and he set the phrase at the front of his first major novel. The Sun Also Rises, published in 1926, followed a group of wounded, aimless expatriates from Paris to the bullfights of Spain. It felt strikingly different from much of contemporary fiction. Flat, clean, and wound tight around what its characters could not say. His story collection In Our Time had introduced that style the year before. A Farewell to Arms in 1929 turned his own war and his own lost nurse into one of the enduring novels of the First World War. By the 1930s, he was famous, and the fame fed a persona he both cultivated and resented. He fished off Key West and later Cuba. He hunted in Africa. He covered the Spanish Civil War, siding openly with the Republic against Franco, and turned that conflict into For Whom the Bell Tolls in 1940. In the Second World War, he attached himself to the fighting in Europe, covered the Normandy campaign after the Allied landings and the liberation of Paris, and courted an official inquiry by carrying weapons a correspondent was not supposed to touch. His private life churned through the same decades. He married 4 times, Hadley, then Pauline Pfeiffer, then the war correspondent Martha Gellhorn, then Mary Welsh, each marriage overlapping the end of the last. Then came the book that sealed his standing. The Old Man in the Sea, a short novel about an aging Cuban fisherman locked in a days-long struggle with a giant marlin, appeared in 1952. It won the Pulitzer Prize. 2 years later, the Swedish Academy gave him the Nobel Prize in Literature, citing his mastery of the art of narrative and his influence on contemporary style. He was 55, and by then widely regarded as one of the most imitated prose stylists of the 20th century. On safari that January, Hemingway survived 2 plane crashes on successive days near Murchison Falls. The second left him with a concussion, serious internal injuries, and burns. Newspapers printed his obituary before word came that he had walked out of the bush, and he lived to read some of them. But he never fully recovered. The injuries compounded a lifetime of concussions, war wounds, and heavy drinking. Over the next several years, his health collapsed on more than one front. He was in constant pain. He drank hard, as he long had, and he sank into a depression laced with paranoia. He became convinced that federal agents were watching him, tapping his phones, and tracking his movements. His friends and his doctors treated this as delusion, one more symptom of a mind coming apart. Decades later, files released under the Freedom of Information Act showed that the FBI, under J. Edgar Hoover, had in fact opened a file on Hemingway and monitored him, dating back to his wartime years in Cuba. His fear was not wholly imagined. Part of what everyone dismissed as illness had a documented basis. In 1960 and 1961, he was admitted to the Mayo Clinic, registered under another name to protect his privacy, and treated for depression with electroconvulsive therapy. He complained afterward that the treatments had damaged his memory, the raw material of his work, and left him unable to write. For a man whose entire identity was the ability to put the right words in the right order, that loss was total. On the morning of July 2nd, 1961, at his home in Ketchum, Idaho, Ernest Hemingway took his own life with a shotgun. He was 61. His wife first described the death as an accident while he cleaned the gun. Only later did the family acknowledge what had actually happened. The pattern ran deeper than one man. His father, Clarence, had shot himself in 1928. 2 of Ernest's siblings, and decades later a granddaughter, also died by suicide. Biographers and physicians still debate what drove his final decline: the hereditary depression that shadowed the family, the alcoholism, the accumulated head trauma, the electroshock treatment, or, as some have proposed, an inherited disease that damages the body and the mind together. They weight these causes differently. The honest answer is that no one can fully separate them. What's not in dispute is the writing. Hemingway did not simply produce a shelf of famous novels. He changed the way English prose sounds. The short declarative sentence, the trust in the reader, the meaning carried underneath the words. These moved out of his books and into journalism, advertising, and the way a whole generation learned to build a paragraph. Every time a reader today cuts a sentence to the bone and trusts the silence to carry the rest, they are working in a form a wounded teenager began teaching himself more than a century ago, in the years that followed the day he was born. That same day, different century. I'm Zach. We'll be back tomorrow with another date, another story. Thanks for listening. Hey guys, it's Zach. Real quick before you go, I just wanted to say thank you so much for listening. It really means a lot. If you enjoyed the show, all I ask is that you share it with someone that you think would enjoy it too. That's the best way to help us out. I'll see you tomorrow.